Welcome to Alex's Introduction to Windows 2012, Installing and Configuring Windows Server 2012. Section 1, Basic Introduction to the Material. So, I hope to cover in this series at least 85% of Microsoft Exam 7410, which is a certification for Windows Server 2012 for installing and configuring Windows Server. My name's Alex McDermott, and I thought this might be a study aid for me, and it wouldn't hurt to spend a little time reviewing it to make it slightly better for other people. Now, this exam covers 9 topics, and there's a lot of stuff in it. If you're not familiar with Windows at all, you're really going to need more material. If you are familiar with Windows networks, then you'll probably know a fair amount of this stuff, and you really just want to run through the labs and look at everything and kind of say, I remember where this is, I remember where what this does. There are some requirements you'll have to know, but you'll want to check with Microsoft.com to see what the current material is. While you need experience and it's really helpful, a lab will work as well if you're willing to put in the elbow grease and read a book to understand the concepts behind what's going on. I've done this with a $600 workstation, and I actually went through this once in ESXi, once mostly in Hyper-V, and decided to do it again in ESXi because I wanted to show off the feature of Hyper-V to function off of an SMB3 share as a failover cluster. So really, what does the exam cover? It covers how to create a basic small network using Windows Server 2012. And then it goes beyond that to where the future of computers is really going, which is virtualization and multi-tenancy. So I'm going to start with your basic 5-year-old simple network in virtualization and show you how it can all work together. And I'll go through most of the material for these 9 topics. I recommend that any that Microsoft's got that I haven't hit, you review. So that's Microsoft's website, and you can see that they have the install and configure servers objective, and I've actually got it here. And you can see that it covers 3 main topics, which have about 20 items on the list. And if you pause this and look at it, you'll see what all of these things are. I would actually read them off of Microsoft's site and see that you know what all of them are off the bat. You've also got configuring server roles and features, which are what does Microsoft consider really good features of this stuff, and what is a useful thing but less important. Then Hyper-V is its own topic unto itself. It's worth 20% of the exam. You have to know this stuff. This is basically installing and configuring a virtual server on top of an installation of Windows, and how you can modify it for good resource utilization, similar to the way you would try to build a physical server to match its expected usage. Deploying and configuring core network services. If you've been doing Windows for a while, all that stuff will look familiar. It's got 18 items. Active Directory basics have about 30 items. Group policies got about another 20 items. We're over 100 items, and those are checklist items that you have to be able to know how to set up a printer for prioritization. And you have to know what prioritization is, that your boss gets to print before any of the secretaries when he's doing his crossword puzzle, whatever. So that's going to be my introduction to Windows 2012. And it starts out with a basic lab setup. And I would like to point out that just to do the lab setup is half an hour. 36 plus 113 is 1.5, 140, 150, plus 19, 2 hours, 10 minutes, 2 hours, 45 minutes, slightly under 3 hours, slightly under 4 hours just to watch me put this together. There are going to be some places where I don't do that well, and there are definitely places where things could probably be done more efficiently. I set up the lab on about a $600 computer using VMware ESXi, which I actually built this computer for ESXi about 6 months ago, and I checked out the white box forums to see what looked reasonable. You can do this with Hyper-V, but you'll probably want to go view the Hyper-V section that I do as a standalone from the lab module in order to cover it. So you got to know a little bit about networks, and for the basic lab, we're going to set up an IP scheme, Active Directory, domain naming services, dynamic host control protocol to give computers addresses when they come up, printing, and file sharing. Printing and file sharing we're not going to do. Clients I'm really not going to cover, but I am going to do Windows deployment services because that's a pretty good one. Same thing again. There'll be an introduction to ESXi. That's a little bit. Creating the first 3 servers, talking about what we're going to create and why. And I got a comment, you need to know the Server 2012 requirements. You need virtual threading for Hyper-V. It's got to be a 1.4 gigahertz 64-bit compatible processor and 512 meg of memory really won't make you happy, and 32 gig might work until the first service pack or so comes out from Microsoft, in which case I expect your machine to run out of disk space. So you may have to expand your drives. If they're not basic drives, it shouldn't be an issue. If they are basic drives, you can expand them as long as you don't set up a lot of volumes. For Active Directory, you need to know it's an LDAP-based directory system that allows for users, groups, computers, organizational units, and other objects to be kept in a multi-master database, and you want to enable the recycle bin. I can't stress that enough. DHCP information and how we're going to run over the servers. And so we're going to do DHCP, Windows deployment services, because I don't want to have to do everything by hand. And network address translation. RAS, the slide at the beginning of this section is wrong because it's RAS and WSIS. So this lets you set up network address translation. And once you've got connectivity from your network to the outside world, then you can set up Windows Server Update Services, which will let you update all of your machines. So what do we got here? Group policies, finalizing the lab, and let's take a look at the basic lab here. I've got built in VMware 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 servers. You don't need this many. If you've got fewer resources, you can restrain NAT1, your network address translation server, or put other features on it and make one of these other ones Hyper-V, and make one of these a file server and do away with these 3. I'm leaving them there because if they're not doing anything, they're not taking up any resources, and quite frankly, I set up my server So it's got a lot of space left. The CPU gets whacked once in a while. If you can do multiple disks, I suggest it. But memory, if we look at the active memory while this thing's sitting around picking its nose, it's this line here, which is really not very much. So aside from boot storms, you could probably get away with 8 if you really had to, but 16 gigs pretty cheap if you can have a motherboard that can support 8 gig slots. And if you need to, you can get 4 slots and upgrade later. I'm hoping to get an SSD or 3 to assign to the file server and give me some increased throughput because I'm getting lagged there. So this is the introduction. And after the introduction, we'll be building the lab, covering Hyper-V basics for people who need to watch that first. And then we'll do file and print services and completely run through the Microsoft checklist to see if you've seen about everything, which I may leave for examples for you. I hope this is useful for you, and have a great day.